Hey guys, welcome to Shift. If this is your first time, we're super pumped to have you here. You can go ahead and scan this QR code and it'll give you all of our information about us. We're moving and we only have 2 more weeks left in the movie theater. If you guys want to help out with the cleaning and the moving process, scan the QR code and fill out the registration forms and sign up. Hey, we're gonna do communion a little bit differently today. Whenever you're ready during the service, you can go ahead and take communion because we have a different ending for today's sermon. Now, let's stand back up and Sam's gonna take it away. I bet. Is it recording?
Yes.
Oh.
We had a neighbor one time who this neighbor saw everything through a very incredibly negative lens. All right, everything was super negative, and she saw the whole world that way and interacted with the world that way. I can remember when the kids were outside playing and there was a car in the neighborhood, she would yell "car." All right, now. I don't mean that she'd be like, "car." It was like, "car." All right, you could hear it on the other side of the neighborhood. As if she didn't yell "car," that the car would know that it was supposed to turn through the cul-de-sac, right, through our little turn. And then if she didn't yell "car," that car would somehow not turn, go straight into her yard, and her kids would have no idea what to do to get out of the way of the car unless she screamed "car." All right? It was bloody murder car. And everybody, there was always something going wrong. There was always somebody trying to get them. Everyone and everything were out to get her. All right? Sometimes somebody tried to kidnap her kids in the neighborhood. Somebody who died in their house was shot by a gunshot. It turned out to be a heart attack. I mean, everything that this woman her kids almost died from something hundreds of times. I mean, just constantly almost dead. As a matter of fact, one time, one of their kids told us that they couldn't play in the rain. I said, "Why?" "Because the rainwater will make us sick." And I'm like, "Well, how will it make you sick?" I said, "Do you take a shower?" And I'm like, "How do you not get sick from showers?" "Oh, rainwater's different." I'm like, okay. So everything, I mean, even nature itself was out to get them, all right? Now, when they finally moved, all right, it was like the clouds parted and sunshine once again existed. Have you ever seen Lord of the Rings at the end where Sauron is defeated and Mordor falls into and the clouds just break open and everybody's like, "Oh, freedom." You know, it was like breathing again. I mean, just this negativity that this person emitted, all right, was just overwhelming. All right. Now, welcome to Shift. We are in week 2. We are in week 2 of Shift Happens, and we're taking a look at 4 things that are going to mark us going forward. Last week, we looked at the idea of radically loving people, especially the other, whoever it is that offends you the most, that's who we're called to table with, which is really difficult, right? And there's always people groups that we don't want to be a part of. And it's not necessarily marked by a race or ethnicity or gender or orientation. A lot of times for us in our culture today, it has to do with, namely, politics. That's one of the big ones, right? And so we took a look at how Jesus calls us to the other and how we have to know people and not just see, right, issues, but to get past the issue and see the person, right, and love them the way that Christ calls us to love them. And so today we're going to take a look at this idea of lavish generosity. Lavish generosity. Now, a lot of times when you hear that, or a church is going to talk about generosity, what are they talking about? Money. Specifically, what kind? The kind that you give to that church. But what if the generosity that Jesus calls us to has to do with what you're giving, but more about how you're living and interacting with your world? And so we're going to take a look really fast in Matthew's account of Jesus' life, one of the early church followers, in a passage that we have looked at before. All right, but we're going to touch base with again because it has everything to do with generosity. It's in chapter 6, verses 22 through 24, and it says this: "The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money or manna." All right. Now, when you look at that, that's a weird passage, right? Because it's like, okay, well, I'm wearing glasses, so does that mean I have unhealthy eyes? I mean, that sounds right. But that's not what they're talking about. All right. If you have healthy eyes, it's a Hebrew idiom. It's something that Jesus did not come up with. It was already in existence, and he just incorporated it into his own teachings. All right. So if you have a healthy eye, it means that you see things generously. That you see things generously. All right. And if you see things generously, then you're going to interact with the world generously, right? But if you have an unhealthy eye, that in the Greek literally translates into the word stingy. All right. So if you see things as stingy, if you see things like this woman did, and everything and everybody's going to get you, then guess what? You're going to interact with the world that way. You're going to treat people that way. You're going to treat circumstances that way. That's how you're going to see life. And before we jump into the main points of what it means to actually be generous, let's take a look at one thing when we're talking about this idea of a stingy worldview, something that I want to dismantle very quickly. And it's this: hurt people hurt people. Why? Why do we feel the need to take complex human issues and boil them down to bumper stickers? All right? Because humanity, humans, and all the things that we deal with are far more complex than just some bumper sticker psychology. Right? Take our neighbor, for example. This person had untreated trauma from a childhood of abuse. So, of course, she saw the world the way that she did because she grew up living in an unsafe environment. If the very people that are supposed to protect and love and nurture you teach you by their actions and the things they say that is an unsafe place, well, of course that she's going to grow up thinking that the world is just like that. Like she almost had no shot. And her untreated trauma spilled over into her children. Right? There was no love in that household. It was always competition based. They were competing for affection. And it was incredibly sad to see. So, of course, they saw the world that way, right? Untreated trauma does far more damage to the person themselves than they will ever do to anybody else. So let's just dispense of bumper sticker psychology because we're far more complex than that. All right. So if we're gonna get rid of that. So if we're gonna take a look, and we're gonna take this idea of a generous worldview and seeing things generously and not treating it stingy, then here's this: being generous with the world starts by being generous with you. Being generous with the world starts by being generous with you. And I say that because Genesis 1 versus Genesis 3. Genesis 1 tells us that God created, right? And that it was good. Genesis 3 is the story of humanity trusting itself over trusting God. And how you see the world goes all the way back, especially if you're a Jesus follower, goes all the way back to the very beginning. Where do you start in your worldview? Do you start with Genesis 1, which says that God is good and created us good? Or do you start with Genesis 3 that talks about us breaking that relationship? Look at what it says in Genesis 1:31. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. So God created all that was good, right? Looked at it, including humanity, and called it very good. The Hebrew, we've got it here for you. The Hebrew is meod tov. Meod tov is what that word very good is in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, that word means exceedingly good, rich, and valuable in estimation. Okay? Exceedingly good, rich, and valuable in estimation. Basically, like if you want to translate it directly into English, God had looked on us and said it is much, much exceedingly good. Including us. Now, Genesis chapter 3 describes a situation where humanity decided to trust their own wisdom versus the wisdom of God. And there are all kinds of dangerous and crazy teachings around this passage, but I think one of the most dangerous teachings to ever come out of this passage is this idea of, look, Genesis 3, see, you're sinful, you're broken, you're worthless, there is nothing good in you, total depravity. Do I believe that humanity struggles? Absolutely. Do we have a tendency toward violence and evil? I think we do. I mean, you can just look at the world, right? I mean, look at how we treat each other. Guys, our kids go to school and grow up with active shooter drills, and we act like it's normal. Look at what we've done to our planet. Of course we struggle with this tendency towards chaos. Right? Do I believe that that's the final answer? No, I don't. No, I don't. I don't, because of what Jesus said to us. If you begin to see yourself this way, then you're going to start treating others this way. Because here's the deal: is that despite what happened in Genesis 3, and that is true, that idea of humanity trusting itself, its own wisdom versus God's wisdom, yes. That's true. But the greater truth is that God called us good. And you have to see that. You are good because God created you good. That is the greater truth. And so hear me shift is that you are good. If we see ourselves as good, guess what's going to happen? We're going to start seeing others as good. And doesn't that almost feel weird to say in church? That you are good? Isn't that weird? I never heard that anyway. And if we're good because God created us good, then that means that person over there is good because God created them good as well, right? So feel free. You're more than welcome to argue with me or push back. That's totally fine. I will just refer you back to what the text actually says. All right? Being generous with the world starts by being generous with you. When my wife and I first started in local ministry, it was in like 2002, 2003. And it was in this small rural community up in northern Missouri. And our youth group was amazing. The church was a hot mess, but our kids were fantastic. And we stayed there for about five years, right? It was like 5 years. And during that 5 years, we never